Hello and welcome to This Week in Pennsylvania. I'm Dennis Owens, and we're covering hot topics in PA policy and politics, as well as the issues that are important to you and your family. And I want to especially welcome our new Western Pennsylvania viewers, as we are now airing in the Pittsburgh area. Welcome to all the fun. We have our analysts to start with. Christopher Nicholas, Eagle Consulting Group, Danielle Gross, ClearPoint Communications. And as we come on the air, and we tape on Friday afternoon, the University of Pennsylvania president, her name is Liz Magill, she is under fire. A number of calls on both sides of the aisle for her to resign after comments she made to Congress this week. She was asked specifically about whether the genocide or calling for the genocide of Jewish people violates Penn's rules or its code of conduct. She said it is a, quote, context-dependent decision. She was referring to free speech protections for students. Democrats and Republicans have blasted that, some of them calling for her to resign, others saying we should hold back funding to Penn Veterinary. They do get state money, and they're arguing that it should be held back. Among them is York County Republican State Senator Kristen Phillips-Hill, who said this on Friday.
I watched the testimony of the Penn president before Congress and was so disturbed that she could not define chants of genocide to the Jews as harassment or bullying without defining the context. And then I listened to a Penn student speak about how he had to hide in his college dormitory, shouts of death to the Jews. He did not feel safe. It is not acceptable. This is not acceptable in the United States of America. This is really not acceptable in Pennsylvania, the birthplace of religious toleration.
What do you think? Chris, start with you.
I think, as usual, KPH is right on target. The Penn president gave an answer that would have gone over well in her faculty senate, but not out here in the real world. The answer to that question is one word: yes, it's discrimination. The fact that she equivocated like that for 2 or 3 minutes, that's why her job is on the line. And I want to be clear, there were a couple other college presidents that testified the same day, and they were also just as dreadful as she was. So there's something going on at Penn and some of these other so-called elite schools, and I think they have to realize that it may work in their little insular community, but when it's exposed to the real world,
I assume that if you're a president of an Ivy League school, or I believe the other one was MIT, that you're a pretty smart person. They knew they were under the microscope from when it happened earlier before about how they're handling things. I thought her answer was tone deaf, given she should have known when she was going there that they were really going to put her to the test, and she should have had a better answer, no?
Well, hate speech is never okay. I mean, that's not really that hard to figure that out.
For her it was,
but,
apparently.
well, the thing is, though, that we have, there are a lot of different free speech cases that have impacted universities, from community colleges to Ivy League institutions, where people have espoused hate speech against different groups. And the courts have ruled that universities cannot restrict that because it is a free speech right.
Well,
hate speech
calling
is,
for
is,
people to die
and they have
is
and
the problem.
Courts have ruled that institutions of higher education cannot restrict that speech multiple times. There are a lot of evangelical Christian organizations that come to different colleges and say that they repeat the same kind of abhorrent things. And the courts have very clearly said that they cannot restrict that speech. Free speech is
Well, it does mean you have the right.
Yeah.
That's not disagreeing. I don't know that anybody's arguing about her
So I
right
think
to
that's
say
what she was trying to
free
parse
speech.
it. I think she did it poorly.
Let's be clear. There's nothing here that's the fault of evangelical Christians that you somehow worked into your answer. It's the problem of all these.
They go and they protest multiple organizations all over the country.
Their conduct's not in question right now. So Penn has a real decision, as do these other schools. Right now, it's not an issue of free speech. It's an issue of you have hundreds of millions of dollars from donors or potential donors who have said, we're not doing anything until you get rid of her. The Wharton Business School, probably their best known part of their college, the advisory board called for her to go. Governor Shapiro totally left her to hang out to dry the other day when he said, and I applaud him for that, I usually criticize Shapiro, when he said that the board of directors really needs to decide, her fate. So he said everything but she should be.
We should mention Democratic Senator Steve Santasero, too. I mean, this is bipartisan and people calling for both her to step down and for funding to be held. We're talking about $30 million that goes to Penn's veterinary school.
Yeah, and that should be taken care of internally. That should be something that their board of directors, that their donors drive. We shouldn't be expecting the legislature to hold state money hostage every time a university does something they don't like, which is something that Kim Ward said last month.
It's our money. We're allowed to decide where it
Well,
goes.
she also said that just because they do something that you don't like doesn't mean that you should yank all the funding for all the students that they impact. I believe
They're
that
calling for an entire people
Senator
to be
Phillips Hill
killed.
probably has some constituents who very much depend on the money that goes to Penn Vet, because I mean, I don't know if you've ever driven through there. There's a lot of farms, a lot of rural area through there.
Well, look, they get $30 million about because the state says it's important to keep producing well-credentialed professional veterinarians.
And they also get
That's
money
good.
for a lot of research for,
and for the
diseases.
and for the resulting research into animal diseases. That doesn't mean they can just get away scot-free. It's our money. We're allowed to say there are strings attached. And by the way, not calling for the death of an entire, religious race.
That's not what
That's
she
a good
did,
thing.
though.
Okay. We're going to take a quick time out. We're going to talk about solar panels in schools in just a moment with a lawmaker who is pushing that past the House. Will it pass the Senate? We're going to talk to Elizabeth Fiedler when we come back. And welcome back to This Week in Pennsylvania. We are joined now by State Representative Elizabeth Fiedler, a Democrat from Philadelphia, and, should note, former radio journalist. Thanks so much for joining us. I want to talk first about your bill to put solar panels in schools to reduce their energy bills and create construction jobs. You call it a win-win-win. Explain how it works.
Sure. So Solar for Schools is a bill that I am incredibly excited about. I've been working on it for just about a year. And essentially, Solar for Schools would help schools across the Commonwealth put solar panels either on the roof of their building, or if they have land, they could put a ground mount system. And then the school gets to save a tremendous amount of money from the energy that they're generating. And the reason that we call it a win-win-win, win-win-win is because the school then has the opportunity really to do whatever they see fit with those dollars that they are saving. We've heard from a lot of schools that have an electricity bill that's nearly zero, which for all the school board directors and administrators I've talked to, the idea of an electric bill, a utility bill that's nearly zero catches their attention very quickly because it's a real challenge for a lot of folks right now.
How much
so
does
the schools get to put up the solar and use the money they save?
How much does it cost, do you anticipate, and who pays for that?
So the projects that we're looking at on average, and it depends a lot, if you're looking at, for example, I'm in South Philly, we have relatively small rooftops on top of our relatively small schools. So you'd be talking about a smaller array compared to, say, a much larger array in a more rural part of the state. But on average, projects cost just about $1 million, maybe a little bit less. There's been a lot of technological leaps forward in the last couple of years in terms of solar that have made it much more affordable. So that's just sort of a ballpark number based on the projects that we've seen across the Commonwealth.
And where's the money coming from?
So one of the really great reasons that we should pass this legislation right now is that the feds are offering a tremendous amount of money in DC to do projects like this. So we believe that the IRA and federal dollars available in Washington would cover 30 to 50% of every Solar for Schools project that we're talking about here, which is huge to have 30 to 50% of your project covered. And then I've also been advocating for a state appropriation. I think that number is very much in flux, but the concept certainly is something that has appealed to a bipartisan group of supporters and that we're really proud of.
Well, you mentioned bipartisan. Your bill passed the House 134 to 69. That's very bipartisan. But it is now sitting in the Senate. What are its prospects? We have just a couple of session days left, which is this week coming up. Could it pass before the end of the year?
I remain cautiously optimistic that it could. Yes, I believe it is absolutely possible. Of course, things are always in flux in the Capitol, and with just a few days left in the year, we'll see what happens. But I can assure you that all of our stakeholders, labor, environmental, elected officials, have been working very, very hard behind the scenes to try to come up with something that we can get across the finish line in the Senate. which would really be an amazing end to this year.
You're going to be very diplomatic on this next answer because you got a bill that's hanging in the balance at the moment in the Senate. But the House Democrats have passed a number of bills that are just sitting over in the Senate. What's your take on that?
I think we have to find a way to get things done in a bipartisan manner. And I would hope that all of my colleagues in the other chamber would look at the various bills that we have passed coming out of the House, bills that we are incredibly proud of and bills that would help working people across all our districts, whether urban, rural, or suburban. Take a hard look at them and think, regardless of the name that's on that bill, regardless of the party of that person, is this a good piece of legislation? And is there a way we can get across the finish line to help all of our constituents? Because I do believe that there are some there that's the case. And I think that the House is going to work very hard in our remaining few days to try to also get some Senate bills across the line, certainly.
You did see some success. The governor recently signed a bill that you co-sponsored that would require medical facilities to get prior consent before performing pelvic, prostate, or rectal exams on patients who are under anesthesia. Now, I saw this bill and I thought, is that a solution in search of a problem? Like, is that really happening?
Unfortunately, the answer is yes. And it was something that was brought to me. This issue was brought to me by a constituent who had gone under anesthesia for a surgery and later learned about this practice and the possibility of it having happened to her. And she went to her doctor and said, you know, I've recently learned about this. Is there any chance this could have happened? And the doctor did not provide her with a convincing answer and did not have the information to be able to say, no, it absolutely did not. In many cases, these are exams that are performed for by a medical student for the medical student's training, not related to the health and welfare of the patient, solely for the training purposes of that student. And usually there's no record of whether an exam was performed or not, which is, you know, in addition to the initial idea of an invasive exam being performed on someone while they're under anesthesia, that's very troubling. The idea that there would be no record, that you could never get an answer as to whether that happened to you, was additionally alarming to so many of us. And I'm really incredibly proud that it passed unanimously and that we're able to change the law and protect patients and also create incredibly bright lines for medical professionals so they know what's expected of them as well.
Last questions, State Representative Elizabeth Fiedler. We just have a couple of seconds left, but there are still things to be done in the budget. Funding for 911, counties are calling for that. Community college funding, Penn Vet, as we just mentioned. What is your take on this unusual year, we'll call it, of fits and starts pertaining to the budget? A lot of new faces at the budget table.
It has been an unusual year. I have been in the Capitol for a couple of years, and I have to say this may take the cake as one of the strangest budget years when we look at it. We have to find a way ultimately to get this done. Our constituents are counting on us, whether we're talking about education funding or some of the other important issues that you mentioned. We absolutely have to find a way to get it done, because soon enough, we're going to be faced with the next year's budget. This needs to be wrapped up before we can possibly tackle that one.
Perfect answer. Thanks so much. The budget address, by the way, is in February. Elizabeth Fiedler, we'll see you in Harrisburg this week. Thanks so much for being on This Week in Pennsylvania. Stay right there. We'll be right back.
I think it's absolute ridiculousness. It's just ridiculous. There's no reason. If you think back 20 years ago, when they were restoring the House chambers, they had voting session down in the basement of the East Wing. 100 years ago, when there was the big fire, they had voting session in the church across the street from the Capitol. So we don't have to be in that exact room.
That is State Representative Brad Roy from Crawford and Erie counties. What he's referring to, he's a Republican. This week, House Democratic leaders put out the schedule for next year, 2024 session schedule. They will not come back until March 18th. They say because there's damage to the roof above the House floor that has to be fixed, there's going to be scaffolding, and that construction will go from January until March, so that's why we have to wait until the 18th. Republicans say nay, nay. John Galloway, a state representative who won a seat for district justice, is going to resign on the 16th. Are you following me? Meaning the chamber will be plunged once again to 101, flat-footed tie, and leaders and Democratic leaders do not want to come to Harrisburg if they don't have that majority.
How incredibly convenient is it that the construction will take place during 90% of the time when the House is down to a 101 tie. So, and I said before we came on the air, it's a darn shame in Harrisburg there's no place where 203 people and 20 staff can get together and work on something. They go to the Hilton 2 blocks away and rent a room and do whatever they wanted
Tens
to.
of thousands of dollars a day.
Well, and
I don't think you have any idea
and as
how
Brad
much it
Roy
costs.
pointed out, the whole place burned down 100 years ago, and they still managed to get together. The House Republican, or the Speaker of the House's spokeswoman said this has nothing to do with the Galloway situation.
Did she have her fingers crossed?
Well, the other thing is somebody else
we
said.
have had some pretty significant hailstorms that have devastated roofs throughout the mid-state very recently, as
disputing-
someone who has to replace.
I'm not disputing the fact that
My own
damage.
that the roof may be damaged. There's only 100 state buildings within a mile of that place that they could meet.
Well,
so
but you're Republican leaning, right? And I
Not
would
leaning, I
ass-
am a Republican,
Okay, what I would
Dennis,
assume
so-
you would subscribe to the Mark Twain, and that is as long as they're not in session, my wallet is safe. So who cares whether they're in session or not?
Well, and
I
let's
have
not
said that
forget,
a lot on this show.
we also are in an era where we want to be able to see all of this going on. If they went to the Methodist Church, there would not be any equipment or things set up, which
PCN
also
would-
is pricey.
PCN, the Pennsylvania Cable Network,
Have
would
you
roll
called
their
them?
cameras right in there.
And I can tell you as a guy who does watch, not much is going on. So you're not missing anything out
If
there.
our friends at PCN are watching, I'm sure they'd roll their cameras
Well,
in.
the other
Right.
point that's worth noting, now the governor will give his budget address in February, and then
Where?
there's budget hearings.
I heard at the
It's going to be
Rotunda.
in the Rotunda, I believe.
It
haven't
will
co-
be
So maybe
terrible.
the House could meet there.
The House
in
is
Rotunda.
coming in for that
If
event.
you ever have been in that rotunda with more than 100 people in it, you can't,
can't
hear
hear.
yourself think,
No, that's right.
let
Now, look.
alone actually hear anyone.
Unlike you, Dennis, I know that legislators actually work when they're not here in session in
know that.
Harrisburg. You sometimes gloss over that. But to not meet for essentially 3 months is really a dereliction of duty. And the Democrats, who've had a really rough year trying to actually run their House that they control, it's going to be hard for them to say, hey, put us in charge
Well, the
of the
House
Senate
actually
too.
has more session days on their
Scheduled,
calendar
yeah.
than the Senate does.
And you can always add and subtract also. But to the point, the governor will give his budget address, and then there's budget hearings in which they're not typically here anyway, and then don't come back until after that and they start to formulate things. So some people are saying,
generally
no harm, no foul.
There's generally like 4 to maybe 6 House session days
But
in that period.
Remember, we have a full-time legislature, folks, and
Wow.
we pay for it.
That's
and
right.
They're not going to be in session in one House for a quarter of a year.
And I
Come on.
cover the Capitol. I still haven't gotten a good answer. Why do you not? I think it's pretty clear they do not want to bring it back, whether it's leak or not, when it's 101, 101. What are they afraid of? And look, they still control the agenda, and they still control what's going to go to the floor and what's not. They've got the majority. I don't understand why you can't come back and maybe work on some of these bipartisan bills and get them off the decks.
Well, I think you'll see a lot of work happening at the committee level, and maybe with more time and less pressure to get it to the main body, maybe they can suss out some of those bills better in committee that they're more appealing to their counterparts in the Senate.
Things stretch to the amount of time you have to do it. So if you give them more time, they may just take more time. So again, it's just very convenient that this roof damage happened right when they were going to lose the majority for a couple months, because as you said at the beginning, the special election for John Galloway's seat in the 140th in Bucks County, you can't have it until, sometime.
resigns.
Well, it'll probably be
in late
February. I mean, you can't, yeah.
It's 60 days. He's going to resign later this week.
Yeah.
So that puts it somewhere,
February
whatever
somewhere,
that Tuesday is, probably the second or third week in February. So
Okay. We'll keep you posted on that. We're going to there was a GOP presidential debate hosted by our parent company, by the way. We're going to talk about that when This Week in Pennsylvania continues.
They make money in China. They are not going to let her be tough on China, and she will cave to the donors.
Now you're a multimillionaire. That math does not add up. It adds up to the fact that you are corrupt.
They're just jealous. They wish that they were supporting them.
So that was a debate at the University of Alabama, and some of the clashes that the football team would have been proud of there at Alabama. And it was hosted, we should mention, by News Nation, the company that owns us, owns News Nation. So they're on the big stage at the moment. So congratulations to them.
I've been doing this for 40 years,
Yeah.
Dennis, but even people at home who've never done this can tell which Republican candidate has the oomph right now. It's Nikki Haley, and that's why 2 of the others, Chris Christie, the former New Jersey governor, he didn't really go after her. He spent his time going after Trump. But the other 2 gentlemen, Mr. Ramaswamy and Governor DeSantis, they spent the bulk of the first hour, which I know, Danielle, you and I both watched together. They spent the bulk of that hour going after her because she is, the one moving fast, quickly up the charts in both Iowa and New Hampshire. And then, of course, she's, the former governor of South Carolina, which is the third state in our primary. So.
Danielle, as somebody who has your finger on the pulse of the Democratic Party, does Nikki Haley concern you?
Nikki Haley does not concern me. She's up there. She's a little slightly less extreme than the other ones, the other current candidates. I mean, she's not the only one up there in heels. That's a Ron DeSantis joke. Chris
Christie had heels on?
Ron DeSantis.
But I think she has a lot of hurdles to overcome to really be a threat.
Look, anyone not named Donald Trump is Joe Biden's worst enemy, because anybody not named Donald Trump does a lot better against Joe Biden than Donald Trump.
I think a poll had Nikki Haley up on Biden by 10 points in PA.
That's a national poll.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was a Pennsylvania poll, but if it's not Donald Trump, the Republicans have a markedly better chance of beating Joe Biden, which is what unites Republicans.
At what point should Donald Trump show up at these debates, or shouldn't he?
Well, he's doing okay without showing up, but he's kind of...
Is he court allowed to leave the state like that?
I mean, next year he's going to have criminal cases, and as lawyers have said, you have to be at a criminal case when you're a defendant. So he may not physically be able to be in Iowa or New Hampshire because he's going to be in a courtroom somewhere.
I do want to say happy Hanukkah to our Jewish viewers. Obviously, Hanukkah is a little different this year, and we're thinking of you. I want to mention that. And speaking of thinking of, just before we go, a Pennsylvania woman named Time Magazine's Person of the Year, Taylor Swift. You're a big fan, aren't you?
It's a political show,
She's
Dennis.
awesome, actually. Thanks for joining us on This Week in Pennsylvania. Hope to see you next week on This Week.
Congrats.